G'day everyone and welcome to this week's Scaleups podcast. This week I am interviewing John James, who is the director of James Hammon. He is like my marketing guy when it comes to helping clients position their businesses better. So usually, how do you kind of link their brand and how they want people to think about them and their product and really figure out where does this need to live in the minds of their customer? It's something that many businesses struggle with, and particularly businesses who are then trying to accelerate and they need to scale up their sales and marketing efforts. That becomes really core and central to them being able to convert leads well and to generate leads in the first place. So it's a really interesting conversation, but it's also a really hard topic to talk about positioning strategy and messaging strategy. So there's parts that are about brand and parts that are about product and parts that are about messaging, and they're all kind of interlinked. So we ebb and flow through the conversation. I don't know if we absolutely nailed every single piece because it's really difficult to sort of nail this down, but we've absolutely given you plenty to think about. There's some really good tips in here. There's some questions you could ask customers, and there's some links to some YouTube videos that will be really instrumental in helping you think about positioning. If you're really trying to optimize your marketing and lift it to the next level of sophistication, today's podcast will be a very good starting point. Enjoy the episode with John.
Welcome to the Scaleups podcast, where each week you get to hear Sean Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
G'day everyone and welcome to the Scaleups podcast, where we help first-time founders learn the secrets of scaling so they can fulfill the potential of their businesses, make bigger decisions with greater confidence, and maximize the value and impact they can have in the world. I am your host, Sean Steele, and I am joined today by John James, director at James Hammon. G'day, John. How are you?
Very well, Sean. Yourself?
Mate, very nice to see you again. We know each other. I'll give a bit of context before we get too far into it, but you are fundamentally, you run a growth marketing agency. You're primarily focused around services and SaaS businesses. And you also host the Champagne Strategy podcast, which I love. It's about strategy, it's about growth, it's about marketing, it's about tech, and a bit of champagne thrown in for good measure. Well, welcome, mate. We've known each other for a few years now. I was, if I can recall correctly, I was chairing a project advisory board for a client who was building a global expansion plan. And, part of the requirement was that we needed to scale up the lead generation, or the sales and marketing efforts essentially. And I said, hey guys, I can help you on the sales side, but I'm not really the lead gen guy. And, once we get too far into the metrics and the actual strategy for execution on marketing, I'm probably going to lose a bit of credibility. So we need an expert. They found you and I got to partner on this, on helping this client. And I was super impressed on the work that you did on the positioning and the messaging, the sort of the stuff that ended up finding its way into their landing pages and what media they used and how they measured and their metrics and how to sort of cut through the noise. So in short, I've referred a whole bunch of clients to you since. All have been impressed. And the majority of them I haven't sent to you for sort of marketing execution from a metrics and analysis perspective, but more about positioning. And what I mean by that is I needed someone to work with these clients to help them figure out how to position their brand and product and then have it supported by a messaging strategy that was actually going to get cut through, because these businesses are generally going very well. They're, they're succeeding. They're mostly services businesses. They're profitable. They're happy, but they've been growing with usually a pretty unsophisticated approach to marketing. They haven't had a lot of structure. They haven't had a lot of expertise, and now they want to scale, and that's great. But to scale, you have to kind of get past just sort of word of mouth and referrals quite often, and you need a bit more juice. So today for us is about this is like the longest setup ever. Today is about unpacking positioning, examples of what good positioning sort of sounds like, what bad positioning sounds like, and the interdependent ingredients around what sort of makes up positioning and how's that different from messaging and so on.
Yeah, well, that's
That was
great.
a long intro.
You kind of just said the preamble, which is great. So we can just dig right into a bit of the meat and veg of how to do it. So, but I just want to caveat, because when we're talking about positioning, there's two elements. There's brand, which applies to the whole organization and multi-products, and there's product. So do you want us to sort of talk about just combined, like the product offering, which includes both in this conversation, or do we do both independently? Maybe
I
just
think
combine. It's probably
let's
easier, I think.
yeah, let's go combine. I think because there's often as you said they're a bit independent, right? They might have you might be able to position a product, but then someone looks at the brand and the brand's really inconsistent. So I know you're always thinking about how the whole thing happens together. So let's do that. So all right, so talk to me about then right up front, like what is positioning? How's it different to messaging? Where does like brand and product and messaging, how do they sort of interplay? Start there.
Yeah, look, the science isn't really strong on positioning, and that's a controversial statement. But from a
Especially from
practical
you, because you're the man who always produces models, and I'm like, where does he get the time to produce these models? They're always so well thought out. They're backed by evidence, and you're
Oh,
like the
thanks.
evidence guy. So,
Yeah, because there's a lot of like commentators out there and people who will do positioning, and a lot of it's just based on anecdotal evidence. And it's really clear to make the distinction between the two. So the science isn't great on positioning. Why? Because it's actually so complex and there's so many variables that go into positioning. But to answer your question, positioning is just where do you want your offering to be in the minds of your customers? And
Mhm.
but the last four words of that are the most important and the hardest. The start of that sentence is very easy to do, and you'll see this pop up in brand positioning, brand strategy decks that maybe a creative agency will do or your consultant will do for you. And that's great saying that we want to be like this in the minds of customers, but actually getting into the mind of customers and for that to be accurate, that's the
Mm.
hardest thing.
I always talk to leaders about that when we're talking about maybe they're having a challenge in a difficult conversation. I'm like, your communication is not effective unless the intention for the communication was transferred, not just the words. Like they can hear the words, but if the intention's not transferred and that's not what they're hearing back, then that communication has not been successful. Okay.
Well, it's the same as brand. Like brand is essentially a little piece of real estate in someone's mind, and it's inaccurate. It
Mm.
decays over time. It's a little piece of real estate that you own. But unless you're testing and figuring out if it actually exists in the first place, it's just all discussions and talk. So I'm really for the latter half of that positioning exercise. Anyone can do the front half and go, we want to be like this. We want to be pitched, product pitched like this and seen like this in the minds of the customers. But getting there is where the value is, and that's the sort of
Mm.
area that I deal with, and that we're dealing with lots of different humans, and they all perceive your offering in different ways, and that's where it gets really complex. So I suppose
Mm.
coming back to what you said at the beginning, defining what that is relative to all other customer competitors in the market is really key. So if I'm using the same positioning as somebody else, then it's not unique, and it won't really have any effect. And the best way to approach positioning is from reversing this perspective, going, if I'm a customer and I'm looking at all these different offerings,
Mm.
which one do I perceive as this and that and that? And that's the ultimate test of positioning.
Mm. And how do you yeah, I like that. So where does messaging fit into that? So is the positioning figuring out where you want it to be in the minds of your customers and you're like, okay, now that's clear and I've sort of reverse engineered that given what they can see in the market, but now I actually have to get in there. Like I have to cut a slice of their brain and get this thing to land in there. Is that where messaging comes in?
Yeah, so messaging, specific messaging strategy precedes copywriting, which is like the actual words or the video story, the actual dialogue that you're hearing. Upstream of that is messaging strategy, which is how do we want to talk about ourselves to the market?
Mm.
Positioning is above that again, and it's more like where do we want to be in the minds of the customers? And this affects what I call categories. And you may have heard of, pitching your thing or category creation. It's a bit of a buzzword in some of the SaaS world or software world, right?
Hmm.
There's this very famous group. I think they're called the Category Pirates. I just interviewed Karen Nelson Field about this, and she's a big fan of the book. I think it's called Play Harder or something. Anyways,
Okay.
create this bit of a cult around category dominance and being a category king. So instead of being labeled as, I'm a service station that sells gasoline, you're positioning yourself and you want to own, convenience or something like that, which
Okay.
is a bad example. But that's the difference here in terms of like thinking broader beyond what your product is and what it does, adding bits of brand in there and going, okay, where in the world do we want to land and own some space in the whole
Mm.
market, and really create a moat around that and protect it and be really clear about what we are and what we're not. And then we want to be known. If we do that really well, the customers will sort of resonate with that. And then when it comes to the purchase choice, we'll be very distinctively different to the other ones they may be considering. And there's
Mm.
a lot of science, and this is where the science comes back in, a lot of science about being distinctive being that will attract our brain, because our brains are hardwired to notice what's different, not what's the same. So it's less about being different for different sake or differentiation, which a lot of people talk about, and being distinctively different. You could do the same things. You could have, I sell shirts and he sells shirts and they sell shirts, but then maybe there's these other elements that just we've got this really cool idea of, and customers start to think, well, they're not just selling shirts, they're doing something bigger than that. Like Patagonia, for example. Like, what does Patagonia do? Do they just make t-shirts and really expensive puffer jackets or whatever, right? Or is it something more? Right? Which space do they own? And that's where it gets really interesting. So there you go.
Okay, I like this. So one of the brands, just as you were talking, one of the brands that was just filtering through to the top of my consciousness is Cirque du Soleil.
Yes.
I remember I had this fantastic CMO who worked for me a while back, and one of the first things he sat down with me and he talked me through this Cirque du Soleil example, where he said, if you think about the entrance of Cirque du Soleil, and he put up this sort of, this map of variables. He's like, here's all the I guess essentially the features of the product of going to the circus. And that is essentially the space that Cirque du Soleil was competing against, people who are willing to spend some money to go a kind of entertaining experience outdoors. So what are all the functionalities? Ticket prices, do they have animals? Is it human performers? Is it does it have any music? Does it have dancing? Is it choreographed? Is it, does it got fire breathing? Like all these sort of things. And he said, essentially what the biggest problem with trying to compete and looking at all your competitors in a sort of, vanilla way is that if you try to compete on everything they already do and then just outperform on a couple of things, first of all, it's not distinctive because people can't differentiate you really from the others because the difference between you and them is not big
marginal.
And it's marginal. And two, it's really expensive because you're trying to build out all the same features and then you're trying to outperform on a couple and all of a sudden your margins are just getting kind of eaten and you come a bit sort of nothing to no one. So he said, well, if you think about Cirque du Soleil, they said, we're not going to have any hero performers. So there's going to be no big brand names. There are no heroes in Cirque du Soleil. Second, we're not going to have any animals. It's going to be humans only. Third, and then they started looking at some of the things that people hated about circus. Okay, well, just the whole grubbiness of the tent and the dodgy seating, and it's cold probably if it's outside at nighttime and all this sort of stuff. So they're like, we want amazing venues. We're going to add dance and choreography that's never been in a circus before. We're going to add music at a level that's never been in a circus before. We're going to train these guys within an inch of their life as professional performers. Like they started to double down on all these other things, but they chose not to even get engaged on a whole bunch of features. So by the time they'd finished that whole sort of strategy and they brought it to life, it was like, as you said, it was like in the service stations, but owning convenience, these guys were like, well, it wasn't about circus anymore. It was about this sort of outdoor experience. And how do we get people who would go to the opera normally to actually come to these outdoor experiences because they value the sort of appreciation of beauty and excellence. And so there was just, I think it's always such an interesting example of how someone really kind of, maybe that's a category creation kind of opportunity.
It is. And this is really interesting because you kind of just got me thinking here. The way I break down and do this for people is I analyze their category entry points. And there's a science, again, CEPs or category entry points. And other people call it jobs to be done or JTBD, like Clayton Christensen. He's a big guy in the tech world around people are buying a product to do something with it. So in the case of the entertainment, they're not buying a circus. They're doing a family outing or they're going to be entertained. That's the category that you're in. You're competing not just directly in your category of circuses, but you're competing in the category of entertainment, off-site entertainment, live entertainment, right? So that means you're competing with the theater, which obviously they talk a lot of theatrical components to put into their show. You're competing with events, live music things. Obviously, a lot of music in that circus. So, and then maybe going to an athletics event or some sort of other similar sort of category. So, what happens is that sometimes when we're working in a business, and like you said, we're hitting this sort of point where we're going, how do we expand more? You're exhausting your oil well of market potential. So the way I think about customers is I think of oil wells. So we've got this little defined market that's this much, and we pump up all the oil and it's going to get depleted. And then to grow, we need to shift to another oil well. And once you do that a couple of times, you maybe you're shifting it and you're expanding outside your sort of product comfort zone and product offering in a whole. And then you're like, well, what are we now? And then you're like, well, how do we define ourselves? And there becomes really complicated trade-off answers to this question. And this is what I help customers and businesses unpack is, well, where are we now? Where do we want to go to? What space do we want to own? And these are really hard questions to answer. And in some companies, the answer is just stay in your lane, double down, maybe cut some things and focus even more narrow. For other companies, it's let's own this space. And if we add on that, and we found products who buy our product for this, often also buy this other product from another company. And maybe those two things are related. And this is what looking at the problem definition or problem solution of your product offering is really important. So you analyze the buying situations in the context of the sale. And like, okay, why are you buying that product? What is it for? Example, you were moved to Coolum, right? And your sons you're looking for schools, right?
Yes.
So really interesting. People go, okay, well, why do we send people to private schools? Is it for education? Yeah, of course. Often what comes out if you ask someone explicitly is, oh, we want to send them there for a better education. What does that mean, better education? And then they'll say, well, that means better quality teachers, maybe better curriculum, a bit more oversight. The teachers can be paid a bit more, so there's a bit more that sort of market mechanism, ensuring the quality of that school because they're reliant on private funding. That's a really good answer. But often, the reason people pick schools is none of that. I mean, that's sort of table stakes, right? They all do that.
It's like the biggest thing, hygiene kind of level.
Yeah, it's hygiene level, right? So it's like, okay, well, now there's 50 schools. It comes down to locality, right? So it has to be somewhat convenient. Not always. There's catchment areas and things into that, but also it's association. It's association with other parents of high esteem, of similar level for networking opportunities, and to get your sons and daughters a better rung and step up in life, so that when they go for jobs, they have a sort of network of other people who have a higher socioeconomic standing, and you can leverage those connections. That's the reason you spend 20, 30, 40, sometimes 80K a year on private school education for your sons and daughters.
Well, it's actually, if you follow that example through and then you think about positioning, right? If the school is trying to position themselves as exclusive, then they also need to ensure that sort of up and downstream that sort of feeds through everything, right? So, where does that play out? Okay, well, scarcity. You may or may not have actual exclusivity, but all of a sudden you're going to be charging $3,000 to put the kid's name on the list. Why? Because it feels more exclusive.
They use a lot of those sales tactics. They insert friction into the sales process. It's like, get on a waiting list. Maybe, and then you actually want them more and you'll pay more. It's funny how they do that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so what would be? Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. I mean, I sort of finished the school example, but I mean, this is expressed in so many different ways. But if you don't understand the buying context, the buying situation, all that happens is that your whole team will be tunnel focused in terms of like the most tangible aspects, the most obvious aspects of your product offering, and they won't think beyond that. And that's a bit of a risk if you want to grow and expand and really own a portion of the market, because, like you said, you're just competing on product features and price, and it sort of sends you into the discount trap, sort of one-upmanship spiral that can be really strategically negative.
So what do you say to a client? I'm just imagining a situation where a client comes to you and says, John, well, our number one differentiator is quality. They're a services business. And you're like, okay.
What does quality mean?
Yeah. So give me an example of like how that conversation would play out.
Yeah. So, I mean, quality is one of those things, like product offering quality. In a services context, quality is very variable in terms of the perceptions. When we've got a physical product, and like I said, I only work in services mostly. I do some work in product, but mostly services. Services has a lot more diverse perspectives of what is quality and what is value and what isn't, because so much is dependent on personal perspective, because you can't touch and feel and hold the product often. So what a lot of businesses do is they try to create a physical representation of the service with booklets or charts or PowerPoints and that kind of thing to help visualize that quality. But essentially, you're buying something inherently intangible. That's your first thing, is like the variability in perspective over what is quality. So one of the things you really want to delineate is what is table stakes quality and what is quality that people are prepared to pay for that is different in the market. And when we're working in our business, we can really lose that perspective, because we understand more via the cursor knowledge. This is a sort of human bias, by the way, that the more you know about your product and your category, the more you assume everyone else to know the same thing as what you do. And that is never the case, which is why the longer you are in your business, the harder this is and the more severe this bias becomes. which is why you always should get independent people or do rounds of market research on a really consistent basis to get that sort of baseline. So when customers are making decisions, they're often making it without all that context and knowledge of your product quality. So they don't know and they can't discern the same things in the same way that you can. So often they're using piecemeal information a tiny bit. They're talking to a friend going, oh, what do you think of that? Oh, yeah, I think that company is good. Oh, yeah, okay. They don't understand why. It's all just a vibe and a perception. So the problem with quality is if you focus too much on the actual product offering and engineering that too much, that doesn't increase the value perceptions by the customer. That is just a road to nothingness. It doesn't have any effect on your market. So yeah, value breakdown's really key there.
Oh, it's really interesting, when you said, okay, there's like table stakes quality, and then there's, perhaps there's another level. And I always think, well, how are you going to prove that? Like, don't write that you do quality stuff and don't stick it in your values and so on and so on, unless you're actually going to really defend it. Like if it's that big and you truly believe that you are so high quality, show me your guarantee, show me the risk to you, show me the penalty to you if you haven't done it right. So as an example, I interviewed Mark Maley, guy from Queensland who runs a big business called ProTech. They, over 16 years went from zero sort of labor hire staff to 4,000. They got 4,000 staff, and they realized pretty early on. And he was an engineer by trade, and they realized that the most important thing in their business was the caliber of the person who showed up on site. Because, someone's like, hey, I need, 5 people to do this tomorrow. Okay, cool. Well, those 5 people are the brand. Like, they are the entire brand experience practically. So he's like, well, how are we going to engineer our processes to ensure that the right person turns up with the right information, with the right attitude, et cetera, et cetera. And so they put in all these big barriers to kind of getting a job through them. They did all sorts of physical testing and mental testing and personality testing, and they built onboarding programs and so on and so on. And so by the time that somebody showed up on site, they could have confidence in putting their brand behind that individual, even if they'd only met them, 3 weeks ago. And so, yes, that means they're a bit slower. Yes, it means they're harder to get jobs through. But the result is they've actually engineered the entire business around quality because that's what they think. And so when you think about the positioning in that business, their ability to actually create messaging or a kind of cut through in the mind of their customer, because they're actually differentiating their processes to support what they think is the most special, most unique thing about them, becomes far greater. And as a result, they've scaled to 4,000.
I suppose you touched on a good point here. I mean, the people are your product in services often. So like, if they're not high quality, then what are you doing? Like, show, don't tell, like you said. Like in marketing, everyone can talk about it, and this comes back to position. Everyone can say that they're like this, but unless they actually are in the minds of the customers, like, show it to me, don't tell it to me. It's and the same thing happens with frontline experiences. So often they'll cheapen out on getting some kind of frontline phone answering person. That first interaction of a new prospective customer is the most critical make or break moment you can ever do. If you're going to export that to like some junior employee without any training or systems and processes, that's a really, really big risk. That's where a lot of new customer sales fall over. And that is only shown up in mystery shopping. But yeah, look, getting back to positioning, I mean, the product quality is one thing, but, engineering that quality throughout your organization is the harder thing. And in the case of Procore, was it? Procore?
Now I can't remember.
ProTech. ProTech. Sorry, Procore is a software thing. In terms of those guys, I mean, they were positioning in terms of reliable quality. And when you're doing labor hire, I mean, that is one of the big key things that like either makes or breaks which company you hire. So it is really important to the decision making process of customers when they're searching for that. So in that case, yes, I understand. But let's just say that firm has 2 other competitors in the market of the same perceptual quality. Which one do you choose as a prospective customer? Now it becomes harder. What are we just going to outcompete on vetting, labor hire? Or maybe it comes down to just the invoicing or the operational efficiency within the organization and the way that they can get someone out really quickly, that's on time, that can be briefed. Then it comes down to sort of operational hygiene. And maybe that's the way that you want to position yourself in the market. There's lots of different ways to do it, and this is why it's hard to talk about positioning, because it's so specific to each company in each contextual situation, and it's all dependent on the customers and the competitors in your market. So
what's another example then? If you could give us an example of positioning that you really think's been super effective, or some positioning you think's actually been terrible, and it'll be obvious to the audience, just to give us some more kind of meat to chew on around what does good positioning sound like?
Okay, I'll use a product example that everybody knows,
Cool.
and then I'll use a service one. And a lot of people don't know, like, I hate talking about Apple, but they've done this very well back in the early days. I remember when I went to school, we all had Apple computers, and I was like, what the hell? Everyone else is using PCs, but in the schools, they had a contract for Apple computers. So they owned the education space very early on. And that sort of went out of a dip and, jobs came back or whatever. Then their second iteration was they wanted to own this space with creative people. And I was working in early advertising agencies early in my career. Everybody used Macs in the studio. Everyone, the whole creative thing, Macs. Everybody on the account management and business operations side of the agency, all PCs. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with this? And I tried to do things on their computer, and I didn't know which keys to press. It was like I was a noob, like I was pretty young at the time. I know how to use computers, but I never used a Mac before. I couldn't use them. So very early on, and this sort of coincides with the whole Think Different campaign that really illustrated this in video form, but they owned the cool creative designer portion of the market. Nobody else could compete on that. So Adobe and them were very close because all the designers use Adobe Suite. So they made sure that there's really good congruence and updates with those two pieces of software, the OS and Adobe Suite. So and then that coolness and creative type spread because everybody else wants to be a creator. Everyone, all designers and creators are kind of interesting people to talk to, right? For better or for worse. So they own that space. And then they sort of went mainstream from there, but they still hark back and you see all their stuff is all very simple, very creative, very visually distinctive. So they still have hallmarks from that initial positioning switch from schools to creative. So that's an example everyone can talk to. And now when you're buying Apple, you don't even think about this, but you think, oh yeah, that's actually designed well. I'm creative. Yeah, I can create, movies and things like that. Not many people do, but you want to. And that's kind of what you're buying into to a certain extent.
Yeah.
That differentiates them in the market to just, here's a 2 gigahertz chips with, 60 DDR RAM, whatever, with this kind of monitor. Like we're just talking about features, and maybe that's a really high quality chip. Maybe it's a really high quality RAM and everything, and the screen's really 16 pixels, blah, 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 whatever. And when you see this in the difference between, if you go to the landing page after this of Samsung Galaxy versus Apple iPhone, you'll see the complete comparison difference between the two. It's very stark. So
very similar product, but very different positioning. Yeah,
exactly. They'll use the same chip manufacturers, half of them. They use the same panel things, use the same battery manufacturers. It's not much differentiation there, but yeah, everything else, that's very much brand and product positioning. So let's use another example. This is a bit of a bigger business. This is an auction house. They do high-end auctions, so they buy and sell, they facilitate the sale of high-end artwork and jewelry, and anything else you have in your house that's, we're talking over 5,000 to, multiple $1 million per item. So they sell an auction service, and they're always canvassing on the buy side, the sell side. They're trying to get people with goods to sell of certain quality, so they vet that, like you said, around quality. And then on the buy side, we have to generate people to bid on these things and to buy them. So it's a sort of dual marketplace sort of business, which is very interesting. They used to be called Sotheby's. They had the Sotheby's license to use exclusively in Australia, and they did so for the auction category. And then after 10 years, the license was up for renewal, and the two owners, Gary and... So this auction house was run in the early days by Jeffrey Smith and Gary Singer. So after the license was expired, they just went, well, actually, no, we're just going to call it Smith and Singer, the two last names. Because, very important point, they were leveraging the brand and the acclaim with the Sotheby's, which is a very sort of like very old auction house, a lot of esteem and acclaim. So they're always doing the top end of the market. But the two principals running the business, that were the face of the business, that had all the networks with very, very high net worth, very influential people in the country, which I can't talk about. They had very strong relationships with that, and that's how they won work and sold their items, because through that influence. So essentially, they'd positioned themselves on a mixture of two personal brands, and that filtered down throughout the whole organization. People came to them to sell their goods and to buy goods because they trusted the discerning nature of these two gentlemen. Both of them came from very well. One of them used to be the ex curator of the NGV in Melbourne, so he was the person buying all the artworks and managing the artworks on display. So obviously had that credibility, but then he'd become very revered in art circles for knowing all the different artists and everything. So in terms of those guys, they position themselves on a personal basis, going, well, who can outcompete a service organization? You can't clone those two people, can you? It's like it's 100% defensible. So they're owning that personal brand space. And when we switched from Sotheby's to Smith and Singer, and this is the best branding thing ever. Like, when people do a rebrand, they get to change all the logos and colors and all that kind of thing. They almost kept the same font. They kept the same colors. All they changed were the two words, Smith and Singer. There was obviously you had to make changes on the website and all those sort of materials and everything, but like it was a very light rebrand. And then there's a couple of PR pieces that went out going, oh, we've changed our name, AFR and SMH and the age and that kind of thing. Anyway, zero negative effect on the business. In fact, it went up. So they do about 50 mil ARR, give or take, every year. They're sort of leading that category. Who can outcompete two people without cloning them? It's impossible.
So interesting, isn't it? So
I didn't have to do much on the positioning side for that client.
So when you think about, I'm thinking back to, one of your early examples. I'm thinking about process, right? Like you're a founder, you're thinking, I've got a good business. It's, it's doing 10 million bucks in revenue. It's got a couple of mil in earnings. We're healthy. The business is growing, but I know I really want to scale. When you take a client like that who just wants to get the best sort of positioning possible, one of the things that you said first is you actually need to get into the mind of the customer. So how do you typically do that? Do you sort of organize some customer research? Because I know that was a part of when we helped this client. Sure. The first question was, well, let's talk to clients. And you and I don't know, well, I certainly did. I spoke to a lot of those clients. I'm not sure if you spoke to them as well, but that was a big feeding input.
Well, I read all your notes. Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, and this is, again, we want to step out of this reference effect that happens when we're working in our business, for our business, as opposed to seeing it like other people do, of differing levels of perception accuracy and different levels of knowledge about the market and the product offering. And you need to be really clear about who those people are and how they see your thing. So you start with, like any good marketing, you always start with research and insights. And the findings of these can often be how do I say, they could challenge perhaps the principles of the business's existing assumptions. So there needs to be a mindset within the company that's open to hear that. Otherwise, you get what happens, which is like, I don't want to listen to that. We are awesome. Our product is awesome. I tend not to work with this company. So the first piece is mindset and willingness to listen. Then you do the research. And then you ask them a series of questions, you do primary and secondary research. You do 3 pools of customers. You do current customers, prospective customers, and people that have churned. So people who are not customers anymore. And it's really crucial to do all 3, because if you just do current customers, you're going to get a bias sample. If you do prospective customers, probably the best. But if you do churn customers, sometimes you'll find very, very interesting things.
And I also, just to chip in there, I often like a 4th category, which I used to do a lot in education, which was, they're a bit harder to get access to, but there's usually a lot more of them, because if you think about a typical, if someone converts, I don't know, 10% of the leads or 20% of the leads, well, that means there's 80% of people or 90% of people who didn't buy anything whatsoever. And that's a big pool of people, right? So you don't need all that many. But I love that sort of, I call them the lost category, like lost, couldn't get him on the phone, not interested anymore, not engaging with any of our EDMs, whatever it is. It's like, these are the people who had some interest at some point. They came to you for a reason. And then they've disappeared. So they didn't even buy and then leave. They haven't even bought in the first place. So what is going on there?
That's where I'd be starting.
Mine. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Gold mine. Complete gold mine. So, and then you tabulate the results like you did.
John, before we get to the results, what are some of the questions that you would consider?
There's a secret sauce now.
Give us a couple of questions that you think you would ask that would add some value to someone who's thinking about how they do this with their customers.
I'll give you one that's, and I can't claim credit for this because it sort of comes from another colleague in Melbourne, Everett Hunder, who's a very good marketer down there, and I talk to him a lot, so credit to him. But he asked people who actually became customers, what was the thing that almost made you not buy from us?
Mm.
And that is really interesting because when I see a prospective customer, there's all this series of failure points that can happen up into and that can kill your sale. And knowing what those failure points are is really interesting. And this is what I'm saying about you have to research the buying context behind this and all the steps they go through. Some people call it customer experience or whatever. It doesn't really matter. You just have to find out where these failure points are in your business and identify them and clamp down on them and reduce the percentage of churn you can at each of those failure points as much as possible. That question is looking for that failure point, and that question is gold because not only does the new customer who you acquired, enjoy sort of imparting their opinion on you, but like it is something that you can then improve next time and go, hey, thanks for telling us about that. We've actually done this the next time, and really want to appreciate your feedback, and this is what we're doing. So thanks for that. And I go, oh fuck, this company listened to us and made a change based on that, and you actually increased probably the loyalty of that customer over time as well in the process. So, you kind of win twice. But yeah, like I would say go back to the customers who are in your category, however you want to define your category or pool of customers. And that those are the people that are not your customers that are the opinions that matter the most, because that's where your growth potential always lies, not in your little niche space that you own if you want to grow.
And I also think, I often think about customers in a services context in three different buckets. The period before they get you on the phone or via email, like sort of the period before they engage with you, the period whilst they're engaging with you, and then the period after they engage you. And what I mean by that is people often forget, we get very, as founders, we get very tied up in what it is that they're purchasing from us. And we think like that's the thing. But generally speaking, services are a mechanism to get from A to B, something that you want. And usually you don't want to pay for it. You don't want to take the time that it takes to do the thing. You probably won't even enjoy the thing sometimes. But it's a mechanism to get from A to B. So it's a sort of vehicle of transformation, if you like. So that's fine. You can ask some questions about, at the point of A, so at the point of, about to engage with us, who else were you thinking about? What were you thinking about? What outcomes were you looking for? Like you've got all these sort of questions about what was going on in their mindset. One of the questions I like is, what was happening just before you decided to contact us? Like, what was the thing that made you think that would be a good idea? And that trigger event is incredibly powerful to understand.
This is the jobs to be done or CEP that you're touching on, which is like the buying context. And digging down a couple of layers, because they won't often tell you, like the school example, the real reason why they're buying it. They'll say the most explicit things. So like having a conversation with that and then, prompting them like you have done with like, tell me more about that. And why is that important to you? Things like that. And you dig
isn't it? Okay,
layers
let's take
deep.
that example. You imagine imagine that perhaps, I don't know, for a particular parent, the thing that happened just before they decide, you send us in a request at like 6 o'clock, on a Tuesday night. What happened during that day, or what happened just before you actually sending that request that made you want to call us? And they're like, oh, well, I saw a couple of the kids, down around the town in the uniform, and they seem to just be articulating themselves really respectfully to this, the shop owner, and having a really engaging conversation. I thought, wow, they're really mature. And boom, you have a very, the conversation they have with you on the phone is all about the school and what's the timetable look like and where are the textbooks and how much does it cost and blah, blah, blah. Like that's all, as you said, transactional hygiene stuff. That's not why they're buying it. They're buying it because your job in that service is to match them back up with the thing that made them call you in the first place, which is not any of that stuff. That's what they're hoping for, is this kid to be churned out the other side, who's respectful and engages well. And that's what that was their sort of view of success.
And anybody can say that, but you just saw a walking advertisement basically for that school, didn't you?
100%. And then if you think about so that's the A section. So I think, B is okay, let's just say B is the service bit, or part one is the bit before, part two is the bit whilst they're with you. And often, the things they're comparing you on what it is that you're going to deliver during the service. But then when you're thinking about product development in particular, and I know we're talking about positioning, but there's a sort of inherent opportunity when you do this research to actually find out a whole bunch of things about where your business could go to and grow to. Because quite often I always think, follow the customer. Like, don't spend heaps of time worrying about, okay, well, we really want to grow this business. Okay, we've got to go and find new customer types that are going to buy the same thing or expand into all these new products and services that somebody else might want. It's like, hang on a second, you've got all these customers using it already. What are they going to do after having your service? Or
what else do they buy?
Well, what happens after that? What are the next things that naturally flow on? Okay, you're a recruiter. You've placed somebody in a role. Well, what after they've placed that role, what's the next thing that's happening? What's the next problem they're going to be solving? What's the next thing that relates to that individual they've just, there's a whole bunch of other product service opportunities that come after that. Okay, well, now that we've solved that problem, we've actually got problems in our leadership team. Okay, well, if that's a natural next thing that comes, or we're going to be working on culture in that person's area. Okay, well, you've got these natural extensions that happen after the service that are often missed, but you can find, if you're going to, I always think if you're going to get people on the phone, ask them some good quality questions that are also going to give you some ideas, because that positioning allows you to think about your relationship with that customer. And if it's currently transactional and you're trying to turn it into relational, the relationship is in the bit after they've left you, not the bit whilst they're with you. So what is going to happen after? How are they going to use your service? How do you make them a hero in doing so? But also, where are the other opportunities?
And I think you raise a good point there. It's about reverse engineering what actually happens in the market, not trying to make your product fit into something that in a category that you're defining. So, when you're talking about CEPs, you're talking about buying a product in context with other things. Where were you at the time when you were doing this? Who are you with? What else did you buy to go with that? Like, you bought school uniforms. Who did you buy those from? Oh, maybe thinking from a product architecture. And this is why a lot of this work blends into then the next thing, which is product architecture that I do, which is what's our offering? How do we categorize into different things with our organization or pillars? And then how can we cross-sell and upsell people between all those things and package it up into different offerings and different price points to cater to that broader market? And those are very hard things, but that's where you get a lot of growth from NPD, for example, or moving into other markets that maybe you hadn't considered. So a lot of what I do sometimes like washes out in this is not just messaging strategy, which you were talking about before, of like understanding like your kids are a walking billboard for your school, and gives some really good ideas of like how to use that in your messaging and in your copy, but also just from a product offering. And that's where the product strategy sort of leads on from this positioning stuff really well. So, and that's where you get these powerful growth leaps that a lot of other people don't care because they're stuck in their lane doing the thing that they've always done. So yeah.
The thing I really like, it's easy to listen to this today and think, this just sounds so complicated and there's so many pieces and they're all independent. What about brand? And then you've got a product and then you've got a messaging strategy and yada, yada, yada. But what you said really articulately, because the reality is lots of people end up with positioning, whether they think they end up with positioning or not, or whether they've hacked it together. Well, they don't all need consultants. They don't all need experts, right?
It's just a paragraph that sits on a document gathering dust, basically. That's where most positioning strategies lie. That nobody really understands. They're going, oh, that sounds good. Yeah, we always want to be a winner in this category. We have some lofty promise, woven into that. Customers don't care about that shit half the time.
But the thing I love that you said is, this is not. It's not an academic exercise. It's not an academic. If you sit there in a room with 3 leaders from your organization and you're like, okay, let's do a 1-day workshop on how we're going to position ourselves in the line of customers. You're all coming up with all these different assumptions. Well, I think they think this, and I think they think that. It's like, hang on a second.
What are they
actually talking
think?
to the customers? Let's go and talk to the customers. Let's really dig into the psychology of the customers, because in the absence of that, you have nothing to base your positioning on. So what you're saying is that is actually where all the gold is. That conversation, that research, you can't do good positioning strategy unless you actually understand the psychology of those customers.
It's a bit of both. It depends. Obviously, I'm sort of using my wisdom, having done this like multiple times, and probably you know what questions to ask because you've repeated and you've experimented with a couple of questions. You're like, oh, that question got some really good gold. Let's iterate within that question. So some of it comes from science, right, and secondary research. Some comes from observational and personal experience, and the rest comes from the market. And I think the more experience to get, it's a dual-edged sword. Sometimes you can rest on your laurels and say, well, I've done this before. I know how this position works, and blah, blah, blah. But each situation is quite different, and it can actually and put on a bad lens if you're doing that. So sometimes people doing this for the first time are actually more open-minded. So you have to be careful with that. But yeah, look, I'm the same. Like, it's all about your market. Like, don't have a boardroom discussion without research basing this. And if you're choosing a consultant, most importantly, go through their process. Like if they go, oh yeah, we poll like 5 customers, like, yeah, how do you do that? Where do you get the sample from? Is it representative of the market, or are you just doing convenience sampling based on your 5 closest friends and then notating it down? That's going to give you a really bad insight, but it's going to look like you're getting good insight. So like, you got to have a bit of discretion on that side of the things. And that's why I always recommend market research should always be independent, outside your organization, and should be really careful about the methodology and pay for quality.
Yeah, I think that's really true.
Yeah.
And that's why I've been running a growth insights service for clients for the last couple of years, is because I often end up in these conversations, and sometimes they want somebody independent. They just happen to trust me. They know that I can get a good outcome in terms of just asking the right questions to the customers. Then I need someone with your kind of skill set to pull together the information and think about how it's actually going to sort of turn into the positioning and the messaging strategy. But
it's really hard too. Like Sean, like I did one for a client who you know about recently, which is a brand piece, and inside there was positioning. And I'm like, well, this is really hard because it was a kind of new product. I'm like, it took me a while to learn actually what they did and understand it completely. And then I was like, it took me probably a month to come up with it. And then I was like, oh, bang, I know exactly how to represent that visually. I know exactly where they should play. And then I pitched it to them. I pitched it to all their board. And they're like, actually, yeah, that kind of makes sense to us. So that's the test that you have to do and get buy-in. Doesn't make sense to them. Doesn't make sense to everybody else. And now I'm testing with the market and it's going pretty well. So, that's the ultimate test is the market. I mean, we can sit here and say our brand is this all we want, but ultimately they decide.
So, John, if you're thinking about, okay, we've got a group of founders, I know we're covering a lot of ground. It's hard to get granular on some of this stuff sometimes. So if you think about, if you were going to guide our audience on, okay, we want to go away and do something ourselves, what would you, okay, we've talked about sort of step one in terms of doing your customer research, get into the heads of all the things that we've already talked about. What else would you suggest they do in terms of sort of sequential pieces to help them think about if they want to sort of self-drive some improvements to their positioning strategy? What would you recommend they do?
I would do. I mean, I'm not a big fan of looking over your shoulder at competitors. It's too much. But only when context is important in the decision-making process of the customer. So if you're coming up against, the 2 or 3 same competitors or however many they are, maybe there's 10, you should do an analysis on all 10, figure out how they position, how they talk, do a mystery shop through all of them, like, phone up, pretend you're a customer, to see what happens, what experience you get. And that is really important because then that shows you where the potential gaps in the market are. So there's nothing worse than a positioning strategy that you do, and then you send it to market, and it's the same as a competitor you haven't researched, right? So really important to do that analysis when you're doing positioning, because otherwise it's a mute point. So and when you do the analysis, sometimes you can figure out, which space are they not playing in? And Kimberly A. Whitler, I did an interview with her. She's kind of like an academic in the US who has a book about positioning, and we talked to her about that, and she used the analogy of battleships. So, we're playing the game Battleships, like which space are the enemy ships in, and where is the clear space that you can put your ship to survive? You know what I mean? And I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it. Sometimes that analysis will pull up some interesting uncompetitive space that you could move into. So.
Well, the reality is when you put yourself in the customer's shoes, we often... some people just think, okay, I'm in a really saturated market and everyone's pretty samey. And some people think they're incredibly unique, but it's actually exactly the same situation as the first one. The question is, how does your customer think about your market and who their choices or who their alternatives are? Because you might think X, Y, and Z are your competitors, but actually when you speak to the customer, they hadn't even considered those people. They might be considering something that's actually quite left field because they're thinking about how they deploy the money to get a solution to solve the problem. And that's where all of a sudden you start to think differently because they give you some information where you're like, they're not even thinking about us as a supplier of X. They're just seeing us as a solution to Y. That's an interest, that might open up a whole bunch of new product and service opportunities. It's like, how do we solve that problem for the client?
Yeah, so and 2 videos that I think will hit this point home if people are listening and they want to watch. These are on YouTube. Again, the Apple cliche example, Think Different campaign, where Jobs does this speech about values. You see it going viral on LinkedIn and Twitter like every month on repeat. But not only does he present the idea very well on stage, it's very rehearsed and scripted, by the way, but he executes it flawlessly. And then just the ad is just so different to any other tech company at the time. And they're just like, this is the space we want to own. These are the people who buy our products or aspire to be. And this is us, and everyone else can go over there and compete on features and all that kind of stuff. But hey, we're over here, and this is where we're heading. And the other one is Clayton Christensen. So Clayton Christensen with a C, and his video about milkshakes and jobs to be done. I think that's a really good intro to just now to get rid of the facade of understanding. That people buy things for a reason in a context. There's a bit more science over CEPs, but that's Ehrenberg Bass Institute. It's probably a bit technical, but I think Jobs to be Done is a really easy way of understanding it for people for their first time. And I think Difference is a really good campaign about really clear, differentiated positioning in the market.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, maybe if you can give me those links, John, we'll make sure they end up in the show notes for everybody. And so, if you're listening today and you're like, wow, that was a lot of information to take in. I think, I'd start with the videos that John has recommended.
Yes.
and realized, yes, it's absolutely valuable to find support. You can use people like John. You can use all alternatives, of course. I guess the key thing is, if you are in a business where you really want to scale, you're going to be pushing up against businesses who are spending their time thinking about where they're actually going to position in the mind of their customers. And as John said, and as we've talked about in some of our examples, you don't want to spend all your time focusing on the competitors, because you sort of fall into this trap. You do need to consider them.
You regress into this sameness, this sort of regression to the mean. Yeah,
exactly. And and so how do you find out, well, where is the positioning in the mind of a customer that would matter to the customer? Because that's maybe what we haven't made clear enough. It's like, it doesn't need to be amazing to you. It needs to be amazing. It needs to stick in the mind of the customer, right? So in the absence of doing good research up front, you really have a very difficult time. You're kind of doing a marketing exercise that's not, it's not going to get the outcome that you're looking for. It might look nice, and you might end up with some nice,
the best analogy for this,
but not cut through.
The best analogy for this is, I'm not sure if you've seen MGM, but the tiger growling at the start of the. Okay, so around the gold emblem is this thing that says, it's in Latin. It says "ars gratia artis," and the loose translation is art for art's sake. So pure art shouldn't be for a commercial purpose, right? That is wrong in business, right? So positioning for positioning's sake is meaningless. Like, there should be a commercial reason for your positioning and for your brand positioning, product positioning, for all your marketing. Otherwise, it's just art for art's sake.
Very interesting. Well, thank you, John. I really appreciate your time today. I'm sure that has given some good questions for people to go away and wrestle with, and some places that they can get started. If people wanted to learn more about what it is that you do, either through the podcast or through the agency, where would you direct them to?
Yeah, just go to LinkedIn, do a personal connection request on there, and just say, hey, I listened to the Sean Steele thing, and I found it really interesting. Take the conversation from there. Yeah, I'm sort of changing a couple of things. Got a couple of projects in the background that are not stated on there, so that's probably the best way to contact me. And yeah, continue working with you, Sean. It's been a really good sort of duo there, and 2 different perspectives and sort of meeting in between, I think. So yeah, thanks for all your work as well. It's been really, really good.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Jay. I was about to call you James because of
JJ.
Thank you, JJ. Folks, if you got value from today, I would really value if you actually left us a review. I know everybody asks that on podcast, and you get to the end, you're like, fast forward, delete, whatever, go to the next one. But the reality is, in the world of podcasting, it makes a huge difference, to be frank, to the team that put it together, because it's a bit of nice feedback from them, and they don't always hear it from everybody. And of course, it helps the algorithms get it into the hands of more people, which is about us being able to help other people create more impact through the information. So if you can leave a review, we'd absolutely love that. Thank you so much. You have been listening to the Scaleups podcast. I'm Sean Steele, and I look forward to speaking with you again next week. Thanks so much, JJ.
Thank you.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalised advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.